Today's youth need teachers, volunteers, and most of all, well, they need you. I'm Doug Edwards, and I'm going to be talking with real youth mentors and students to give you the knowledge you need to be the best youth worker possible. This is Youth Worker on Fire.
Oh, you're trying to bring me down and run me out of town. You're taking what you want, but you can't take my rhythm now. I'm walking to my own beat, just gonna be me. I'm not replicating nobody.
25 years ago, we had Johnny Cash, Bob Hope, and Steve Jobs. Now, we have no cash, no hope, and no jobs. Please, God, don't let Kevin Bacon die. My wife told me about this morning. During our devotions, she said, "Oh, I just saw this." And it hit me, and I thought, well, Stella, tell me that again. I said, I got to hear the whole thing again. And she said, 25 years ago, we had Johnny Cash, Bob Hope, and Steve Jobs. Now we have no cash, no hope, and no jobs. Please, God, don't let Kevin Bacon die. I thought that was hilarious, but it was also so profound. So I started looking up a few things. And here's one. So I'm going to tell you what it was first. You can look up Gates' Law, and it says how progress compounds and why it matters. Actually, I wrote the rest of that. You can just look up Gates' laws or some of these others. And what is that? Most people overestimate what they can achieve in a year and underestimate what they can achieve in 10 years. Now, I've heard that over and over again, and there's reasons why. It's unclear exactly, and I'm quoting from what I looked up, okay? It's unclear exactly who first made that statement when they said it, or how it was phrased. The most probable source is Roy Amara, a Stanford computer scientist in the 1960s. Amara told colleagues that he believed that we overestimate the impact of technology in the short term and underestimate the effect in the long term. For this reason, variations on that phrase are often known as Amara's Law. However, Bill Gates made a similar statement, possibly paraphrasing Amara, so it's also known as Gates' Law. Amara's Law, also Moore's Law, goes into that. Warren Buffett, in his biography, it also states it in this article, is called the snowball effect, and the list goes on about the compound effect of time. Now, I've listened to quite a few things and read quite a few things about Warren Buffett. He comes off, whether he is or not, a very humble man. The compounding effect he talks about, and particularly, is just astronomical when we invest. He invests in things called index funds as opposed to what most of us do with mutual funds. And if you know anything about Warren Buffett's life and his finances, he's one of the richest guys in the world. My understanding is he started late in life, and now he's in his 80s, and his company is one of the wealthiest companies in the world. And I won't go into all that. You can look that up and figure that out, and it's worth your time if you do, especially if you are a youth worker, a young youth worker, especially if you're a young youth worker, but it doesn't matter if you're an old one either, or if you're a mom, a dad, a grandpa, all that. I'm a grandpa, I'm a dad, I'm all those things. The effects of long-term student ministry in a particular area or in several areas because of the compound effect. You know, we overestimate 1 year, we underestimate 10. And so 10 is a big factor. So here's what John 14:12, where Jesus talks to his disciples, and we'll get this from the New Living Translation. If you don't like that one, go back and look it up, Bible Hub or something, get your translation. This is how it's written there. I tell you the truth, anyone who believes in me will do the same works I have done and even greater works because I am going to be with the Father. Now, not long ago, or is either last week, whenever this episode shows up, where Sarah Cook was there, we look at the long-term effects of our ministry. And she talks about how our ministry affected her and affects her to this day and with her family. And she went through a lot of school to become a physician in the area of oncology. And if you don't know what oncology is, that is a doctor who deals with cancer. But we invested in her and many, many others through discipleship. My wife was her discipleship leader. But we'll go on. Our investment in children and even more in their teenage and college years is compounded. Whatever we put into them is compounded over 1 million times. I'm guesstimating that. It may be 1 billion times. It may be 1,000 times. You can do the actual calculations if you want. But whatever we put into them is compounded and reaches into generations beyond our lifetimes and others. Now, we invested in having children more than 25 years ago. My first son, Ryan, who edits this, has been editing many of the episodes. He did 101. In fact, Ryan, I estimated it when you got to 200, you had actually edited 101 for 101 weeks to get us to 200. And I thank you for that. But our investment in our children, he's in his mid-30s, Chris is in his early 30s, and my daughter Holly is in her late 20s now. They are all more successful than I ever dreamed of being. But the compound effect of what they're doing, the investments that we put in them alone, have gone so far beyond what we put into them, even though we sacrificed a lot. You're going to sacrifice for your children if you love them. You're going to sacrifice for others if God has placed you in student ministry in ways that you never thought you would do it. People who are called to student ministry, whether they're leaders, full-time youth pastors, part-time youth workers, volunteers where they pay their own way and all those things, what I've found is those who are called, they go far beyond what is required of them. They cannot help it. In fact, I tell people that people who are part-time youth workers or youth pastors or part-time teachers or whatever, or part-time volunteers, they are not part-time. If they are sold on the compound effects and the need to put Jesus into the hearts of adolescents, and because of the necessary and the importance of that to the future of the kingdom of God, the future to our world, the future to our families and our own children, the effects that has on our children, we affect the families that other children are in by pouring Jesus into them. The compound effects, the ripple effects are astronomical. They're beyond calculations. Why? Because God compounds it. We plant a seed, and if you know anything about the seeds, and Jesus talks about seeds a lot, we plant a seed, somebody else waters the plant, somebody else tills the soil and makes sure it's clean, but God adds the increase. He brings the harvest, and then he brings his own people to make the harvest happen. If you go back and start listening from the beginning of this podcast, Youth Worker on Fire, and start sending these episodes out to individuals as you listen. If you start from the beginning, you listen to all 200 and actually 201 by the time you get to this episode, it's either 201 or 202, then you will get evergreen effects, because every one of these episodes will talk about either a student or a person, an individual who is in some professional area now, or who is a college student, or somewhere in these episodes, the effects of what student ministries did to them, or the effects or non-effects of not having this kind of effect on their life when they're teenagers. But you will hear about where their life is now and what adding Jesus into their life during their adolescence, and particularly how it has compounded what it has done for their future, what it has done for their spouses, and what it has done for their future children, or if they're older now, those compound effects. So we underestimate what can happen, and that's why I think a lot of times student ministries, youth workers last only about 18 months. The average volunteer only lasts a year. The average paid youth pastor, youth worker only lasts about 18 months. This has been the story for decades. They may have a little bit different stat now, but I doubt it, unless God has moved you on. But most of them are just done completely when they finish that time period. It's because they don't understand that the compounding effect, that their need was 5 years just to find out what was happening from those first seeds they planted. And they told us in Youth for Christ, you'll not know, you'll get your first phone calls or first messages from people going 5 years ago or somewhere in that 5 years, you did this, you said this, and I wasn't ready to tell you then, but I've asked Jesus Christ to my heart. My life has changed forever. Different things like that will happen. But what about the effects of 10 years? What about the effects of 25 years? Those guys, some of you don't even know the names of those people in the joke that I told at the front of this episode because you were so young, or you may heard about them, and probably Steve Jobs you knew about because of Apple computers and iPhones and all those things, but the others probably not. And yet I even talk about Johnny Cash in one of my not too far back episodes because it was because of his life and God changing his life and the effects of him pouring into Youth for Christ that I even ended up in student ministry at all. Wow, it's amazing what a joke can bring out, isn't it? Well, 31%, guys. If you make somebody laugh, you make them 31% smarter. If you make them laugh, I think if you make them smile too. So I'll leave you with that. Don't underestimate what God's going to do in the next 25 years. If you read those articles, you'll hear about technology and the compounding effect that has overwhelmed them and some of these theories and how they came up with these Gates laws, Moore's law, and all of that. It's very interesting stuff to read. But the more you read the scriptures, you'll see over the 1,500 years written of scripture and the compounding effects of God interjecting himself into lives. And since he is the creator of the world, what all of that has done and where that is leading, never underestimate what God can do in the next 25 years if you'll start planting seeds now. See you next time.
You've been listening to the Youth Worker on Fire podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and tell your friends. Also, leave a comment and tell us what you think. Stay tuned for more informative episodes.